Does education empower us or stifle personal growth? My name is Tobey from Training Business Pros. Thanks for joining me for another one of my tutorials. It's a question that people often ask themselves. Should I go for traditional education or non-traditional education when it comes to my personal growth? So first of all, let's define personal growth because that's an important element. So personal growth is the self-improvement of your skills, your knowledge, and in my case, knowledge versus experience, that's important, personal qualities and your goals and your general outlook on life, whether you're more optimistic or pessimistic about the future. So when it comes to education, there is traditional versus non-traditional. I'll talk about the differences of each, and I've got 6 things that are super important when it comes to putting one against the other. And then in the end, and you really want to stick around for this because I'm going to share with you a learning method to learn and accomplish anything quicker than you thought possible. And this is something that they certainly don't share in traditional education. So remember, I've got 6 things to share with you that's really going to help you decide on what you want to do in terms of your personal growth. Let's get started. Okay, so right off the bat, let's talk about the differences between traditional and non-traditional education. So traditional means more like college, university. And that is obviously the most popular thing. I remember when my son graduated from high school, out of the 300 students that graduated, only 6 weren't going to university. So extremely popular choice. And we're going to talk in this video about 6 things that you need to know about traditional education versus non-traditional, which is more like seminars, training courses, hiring consultants, coaches, retreats, things like that. And there is an extreme difference between the two. And you may end up doing both like I did. And I'm also going to talk about my personal experience with both as we go through this. Just a quick story about my son. My son, after 2 years of university, dropped out. After failing his first course, he just really wasn't that interested. But his reasoning was he really wanted to get started in business and get his foot in the world. And he's actually built a pretty successful business over the last couple of years since he left university. And my feeling is, hey, you can always go back. But he feels that he's learning a lot more in the real world and going to conferences and retreats and things like that where he's learning from experts. So let's talk about the 6 differences between traditional and non-traditional education. The first one is traditional tends to be more theoretical, problem solving, and a lot of memorization. So yeah, I mean, obviously that helps the brains function properly. There is value in that. But if you take a look at the non-traditional side, it's more practical skills training and it's more learning by doing. In my world that I live in, and I live in the business world, obviously, and I've been running my business since 2004, I've learned over the years that the best way to learn is to learn by doing, not necessarily just trial and error, because that tends to be a terrible learning method because you don't really know the errors that you're making and you tend to make the same ones over and over again. The concept of learning by doing means going and taking courses from an expert who has the knowledge and experience to share with you so you don't make all the mistakes that they did. So that's a big difference. The second one is in traditional education, you tend to have teachers and professors, whereas in non-traditional, you've got more doers. These are people, like I said, with experience, people who have made a lot of mistakes and have no problem sharing those mistakes and obviously triumphs and successes with you. So that's a big difference. Whereas in traditional education, I think a lot of the teachers and professors don't really have a lot of real world experience. And of course, that's not a blanket statement. Some do. But I think when you're talking about tenured professors, I mean, that's an educational institution where they've been living and working for most of their careers. So getting out in the real world after university, it depends on who you're learning from and how that can help you. All right, number 3. I found in traditional education, because I have 7 years of post-secondary school in music, that there is not much in the way of leadership skills training, not much in the way of money management. In fact, I don't remember ever talking about money in school, which is kind of a critical element in real life. And then finally, they don't really talk much about the business world. In fact, in music school, you would think that after 7 years, I would have some idea of how to go into the world and get a recording contract or get a gig or figure out how to run a music business. But no, there didn't seem to be much of that at all, versus the more non-traditional way where you've got personal growth courses, lots of leadership training. They talk about universal law, which is really important that they really don't talk about in school. And then finally, money management. I mean, that's something that's been extremely helpful in my life since I've learned it. And my financial wherewithal is very different than it was for the first, say, 20 years of my adult life, when the only thing that I had was traditional education. So I think you can see which way I'm leaning at the moment. I'm not trying to discourage you from traditional education. I'm just trying to say, here's the differences that you need to think about. So in terms of personal growth, you've got a long-term time investment in an educational institution versus more sporadic short-term training sessions. And then you take that information and you go out and you do something. So essentially, you don't have like 3 years in a row of courses. You have 3 days of intense training, and then you take that information and you go out into the world and apply it. So that's a huge difference between traditional and non-traditional education. It's like the concept of short, intensive training courses, something that I've been doing for others in my business since 2004 as a training company. And I find that people tend to get a lot of value out of that and are very grateful for those training sessions. Number 5, traditional tends to be more career-oriented, which means that you're going and you're looking for a job. In the corporate world, you tend to be thinking along those career lines, versus non-traditional, it's like more business focused, where you're building something, you're working for yourself, you're taking the skills and the knowledge that you've been given and you're transforming them into a business opportunity. That's a really big difference. And finally, number 6, I find that traditional education tends to be these days extremely expensive, versus non-traditional. For example, a 3-day intensive course, in your mind, a couple of $1,000s might seem like a lot of money, but it is an intensive training session and you can start to see a return on that investment very, very quickly. And I find that the return on the investment from a non-traditional training and coaching and consulting side tends to be much quicker and tends to be much bigger in terms of the investment. So a $2,000, well, let me give you one example. Once I invested just over $3,000 in a presentation training course. In other words, learning how to present, public speaking, that sort of thing, and learning how to be a better trainer. And in my first year, I did $168,000 in sales that I had never done before based on that one course. So that alone is a significant return on investment if you think about it. And it was quite miraculous. And the next year was even bigger, the year after that. And of course, I've never looked back since then. And I've taken dozens of these training courses since then. So I always try to seek out people that I admire and respect and find out what they know, versus a traditional education, which tends to be more, again, theoretical. Okay, I promised that if you stuck around to this point, I'd share with you the most effective learning method that I've ever encountered. And that is what we call the 10-24-7 method. Let me repeat that. It's the 10-24-7 method, which essentially means learn one thing at a time with a level 10 energy on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most energy you can put out. Then repeat that same learning the next day in 24 hours. And typically learning by doing is the best method. So if you're engaged in the learning on a level 10 day 1, do it again in 7 days, and then, or do it again in 24 hours, and then finally again in 7 days. So that increases your retention rate by like 85%. It works extremely well for business activities or anything that you can do, such as the piano, for example. And if you would like to check out some of my piano skills, go to jazzmental.com, because that's the method that I use to retain a tremendous amount of musical knowledge. And of course, like I said, it works equally well in the business world. So does education empower us or stifle personal growth? If you look at the 6 things that I shared, I think you can see which way I'm leaning. I think it does tend to stifle our personal growth a little bit, or a lot, as it were. Thanks so much for watching. It's Paul Tobey here. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. When you do, it lets us know your level of interest and will help us create more content just like this for you and other people just like you. If you have any questions or comments about the content, please post them below and we'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks for your time.